Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton. Hello, welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups, to our penultimate episode. Yeah. Today we are going to be talking about child sexual exploitation and grooming. We have our very own Kelsie Holdstock-Clarke, who's our expert in this subject, who's going to be taking us through it step by step. As the title suggests, this is going to be a bit of an intense episode for some of you listening, potentially. So I guess this is probably one of our first trigger warnings that we're going to give on the podcast. We are going to be mentioning things, obviously mentioning sexual exploitation, violence against women and girls. We're also going to maybe mention sexual assault and harmful sexual behaviours. So just go at your own pace. You can pause it whenever you need to, but it's a really, really important topic, so we do urge you to listen if you can. So on that note, let's find out a little bit more about you, Kelsie, and how you sort of landed in your exploitation role at Sexual Health, and sort of what experiences have led to you being here.
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting journey, actually, and it would be fair to say that sexual exploitation wasn't necessarily where I imagined that I would be working and what I thought I would be doing. So my background starts, as I think I've mentioned, in working as a youth worker. And while working as a youth worker, I ran groups with young people in really quite deprived areas of Hatfield, Welwyn Garden City and Stevenage. And while I was doing this, I became kind of more aware of criminal exploitation and like so much happening around county lines in that area. So deprived young people living just on the outskirts of London who were essentially being used to like move drugs around the country. And then we ran groups for girls who were living in that area. And I kind of got into this work. Anyway, that was a 4-year gap between then going off and working as a teacher. And when the job at Luton Sexual Health came up, I was like, is this something I can do? So the job title was Sexual Exploitation Outreach Lead. And what that role entails is delivering one-to-one support for young people who are either at risk of being exploited due to some adverse childhood experiences that we'll talk about, or people who were actually already perceived to be victims of sexual exploitation. This role also included supporting women who were who are working on street sex working, who are commercial sex workers. Yeah. And actually what that has helped me to see, where I don't necessarily do so much of that role because one of our other brilliant colleagues has taken on some of that element of support. What it really helped me to see was the journey of these women from child sexual exploitation into sort of full-blown sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, on-street sex work, narcotics addiction, and actually how that starts at quite an early age. Yeah. So I came to Sexual Health, started this role, which is more about education, support, and kind of helping people access the service so that even though we might know they're being exploited or something like that, they still need to have their chlamydia treated. Yeah. Or we still need to make sure that they're not getting pregnant, that kind of thing.
Amazing. And for those of people who may not know, we often refer to it as CSE, child sexual exploitation. What does that actually mean? What does it mean?
Yeah, how do we define CSE?
Yeah, exactly.
So CSE is about an exchange. So it is about sex, which is transactional in its nature. A young person will be having sex with somebody in exchange potentially for gifts, money, drugs, love and support. Yeah. Like basically it's a situation where it's transactional and that the sex is only happening because one person's need is being met in exchange for another thing.
Yeah. And how does that sort of link in with the RSE curriculum, would you say? Like, because we don't often get asked to go in and teach young people about exploitation as a standalone, although we are being asked more and more that, you know, those more like, we're getting more specific requests, I would say, from educational settings about exactly what they want.
I would say that the issue with that potentially is that some of those requests are happening because something has happened.
Yeah.
So because there's been a traumatic situation or because they've become aware of exploitation, then they're like, oh no, we need to call them in and do this work.
Yeah.
But actually it isn't necessarily mentioned overtly on the RSE curriculum.
Yeah.
And it isn't something that maybe we would do as standard, but we do know that exploitation is happening more and more. And I think some things have happened over the years to kind of bring light onto child sexual exploitation, but it still isn't something that's talked about that much.
Yeah. And so obviously we're going to talk a little bit about like how exploitation happens. You're going to explain what grooming is and the grooming cycle. But could you just sort of maybe set the scene for us in terms of what you've seen working here in Luton, some of the young people you've worked with? Obviously, we're not going to go into details about some of those one-to-ones because actually in the car on the way here, we were also saying like, it is really intense.
Yeah.
It is quite disturbing. It is upsetting. But can you sort of explain a little bit about maybe some of the referrals that come through, some of the key themes, like what's happening for people that don't know? Because it is sort of a hidden...
It is a hidden issue.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to distinguish whether somebody is in an unhealthy relationship or whether they are being sexually exploited.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes we have referrals come through where the person is not being sexually exploited and they do just need they need education around risks and healthy relationships, but it isn't exploitation. So some of the things we see are, this is a situation which tends to happen to our most vulnerable young people. That would be fair to say.
Yeah.
Predominantly children in care. We see a lot of one-to-one referrals from social care for children who are in a care setting or who have experienced potentially some really serious traumas.
Yeah.
Or they have some needs in their life that are unmet. So this could be children who have parents who are addicts, children who have experienced some sort of trauma like bereavement or separation, children who are in the care system. But essentially what happens is that the fact that they potentially don't have a solid foundation of a healthy family life or stability or financial security, something like that, it means that there's something for someone to offer. So some of the referrals that we see that come through from professionals generally happen around young people going missing. And the first sign realistically that might start causing alarm bells, maybe for parents or professionals, caregivers, is significant missing periods that would be unexpected and unexplained.
Yeah.
And that's when we tend to get the referrals because young people then, something might have happened. Sometimes we get a person who went willingly with somebody, but then they weren't able to return home. And that's really scary. When we get young people who present to the police or to the hospital in different areas of the country.
Yeah.
And that is very indicative of a child being trafficked around. So for example, we had one young lady who 1 week she was in Newcastle, then she was in Leicester, then she was found in a hotel in Birmingham, which transpired to not be a hotel, but to be a brothel just by doing a small bit of Googling.
A Google search?
Yeah, a Google search led Sophie and I to realise that this girl, who was 15, had been taken by older men to a brothel in Birmingham, things like that. And then other people who are in London and have presented in crisis at hospital or to the police in London.
Yeah.
So although there are other signs that we can look into, one-to-one referrals generally come when those missing
episodes start happening. And what are some of the other, I guess, signs that somebody may be exploited, groomed? And can you also talk to us a little bit about what grooming is and where that comes into? Because I think potentially what I see in the media and TV and films where they might be doing a storyline, they're often using the word grooming or somebody is groomed. And I'm just wondering for our audience, like, how does that fit into the child sexual exploitation umbrella, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that people talk about grooming and it's kind of become a word that is a little bit thrown around.
Yeah.
They're going to groom them online, or it takes away from the severity of the situation. So if we just go back to other signs you might notice, distinct changes of behavior is a really important sign. If they become more shut down or more the opposite, like more ready to flare up, maybe angry, antagonistic, those kind of things could be a sign, but it's a change of behavior. Unexpected, like money, gifts, things like that. So if your young person is all of a sudden coming home with like new designer tracksuits and new trainers and nails done and all of those kind of things, that's like, How? Where?
And we had that young person, didn't we, who was ordering things online. So there was always new packages coming through the door, and she was trying on all of her clothes in front of her family. But there was never that was a situation as well where there were lots of different barriers involved, which made it hard to distinguish like what exactly was going on. But, and she'd be dropped off in big, nice cars and she'd be on Snapchat in really nice restaurants. And it's just like starting to, I guess, connect all those dots. Yeah.
And it is really about like the pattern of all of these things happening. So the change of behavior, the new items. And then it's about the young person being separated from their situation. So not hanging out with their old friends, talking badly about their old friends, not wanting to spend time with family, and being really hyper-focused on this new force in their life. Yeah. So grooming.
Yeah.
When we talk about grooming, we generally refer to it as a cycle. And how the grooming cycle starts is by identifying a need. So a person will maybe chat to, 10, 15, 20 different young people. And some are really receptive because they feel really unheard potentially, or they're quite lonely, or because nobody's paid them any attention. And essentially that's like a little step in. Yeah. And I think it would be fair for me to say that a lot of my experience in sexual health and all of my one-to-one referrals and the situations I've worked with, the grooming has started online. Yeah. Young people don't potentially start to be groomed by a stranger face to face because a stranger.
Yeah. No, it's not that case of their approach. This does happen, but it's not the case that they're approached in the street.
No.
Because from a young age, like we said, you're at the stranger danger, you don't talk to people that if they approach you. But online now, it's a different world where you can literally send a Snapchat to anyone. Exactly. A mutual friend. Yeah, that happens a lot.
So like the friend of a friend or the someone that knows someone that you know. Sometimes grooming happens by older adults within a family. That's potentially more for sexual abuse rather than child sexual exploitation. But it is about, so they identify a need in that young person and then they'll proceed to learn more about it and fill that need.
Yeah. Just because you say loads of great stuff when we're in teaching sessions, so I want to bring up something you said to a group of young people we recently saw about what that need is. Yeah. And I don't know whether actually I'm jumping a step here for the as part of the grooming cycle, but you also said something about how that need doesn't necessarily need to be like a vulnerability. Like we were talking last week about somebody who has an additional need, for example, who is neurodivergent or has a learning disability, but it could be that they just see a young person who maybe is like young and wants all of this independence. Yep. And they're like, oh, you're treated a bit like a baby at home, aren't you?
Yeah,
like,
they really start to So absolutely. It is not just necessarily about a need when it comes to like financial or something like that, or like a physical need. It can also be like a need for excitement, a need for adrenaline. Yeah. And it's difficult, but a lot of the young people who are victims of sexual exploitation, whether diagnosed or not, present symptoms of ADHD. And it's a lot of girls, neurodivergent girls, who maybe don't understand potentially the fact that someone might be being disingenuous and also have this kind of need for excitement, dopamine, curiosity. Yeah. And a little bit of an element of thrill seeking. And what I have found in my experience is that those two together kind of create the perfect storm. So that's not to say that every young person who is in care or has adverse childhood experiences could be a victim of exploitation. Not every young person who has ADHD could be a victim of exploitation, but sometimes they come together.
Yeah, that combination.
Yeah, in a way that means that the person is looking for excitement and fun, and then somebody comes in, learns all about that need, fills it, gives them a huge amount of dopamine by being really attentive and sharing exciting experiences with them and shiny gifts and all of those kind of things, that actually that becomes quite a nice feeling.
Yeah.
And we talked about love bombing on the previous episodes, but that's the love bomb. That's the initial part where they're like dropping it in.
Yeah, it's the hook in, isn't it?
It's the hook in. And then the next stage is the separation. So that is where the perpetrator of the grooming will try and cause a divide between the young person and other significant people in their life. So this could be a lot of what we hear is like, oh, your parents don't understand you. They're always going to treat you like a child. They've got all these expectations for you. And I treat you like an adult. I respect you. I want you to be the beautiful grown-up woman that you are. And they're talking to a 15-year-old and it's like, But it doesn't just happen with parents. It can be with friends. Your friends are jealous of what we've got, kind of create that wedge and that divide. So you're isolating the person. And then when somebody has been isolated but had their needs met, they're now indebted to the person that is grooming them. So this then presents as where the sexual exploitation kind of starts. And I think it's really important to say that young people don't perceive themselves as going through this cycle or as being groomed.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's like, it goes from here to here to here. It doesn't always happen.
It doesn't always happen in like a neat circle.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen on a set time frame. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same for every young person. And some people, it could be like, it's very upfront. I will buy you a coat. I don't know. I've had somebody say that they were offered, I'll buy you a new coat if you have sex with me.
Yep.
It's very transactional, very upfront. But I've also had some people that say, oh, well, how could I have said no to having sex with him when he did this for me and he did that for me and he's so kind to me and he loves me so much. So obviously I need to have sex in response, really.
And in terms of young people as well, responding to that like transactional sort of affection and love, I think we've had quite a few conversations. I can't remember if we've had it on our episodes because we've sort of done so many now, it's a blur. But when a young person is potentially used to transactional love or used to things being sort of, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you, then that's really quite normal. It's really normal. It's a normal way of someone showing affection. So they may be less likely, I guess, to see the warning signs. Because I'm just thinking about when under 18s come into our clinic and we have a safeguarding pro forma that we do with them. And one of the questions on there to identify any exploitation risks is, have you ever been offered gifts, money, drugs in exchange for sex? And it's really interesting, the amount of young people that go, no, like, why are you asking me that? And then some young people who go, yeah, or no, or once, like it's cash. Yeah. It's not that deep.
And it's really that distinct.
Yeah.
So they're either like, what, no, why are you asking me that?
That's so weird,
Or,
Yeah.
And I think that parents and professionals would probably be shocked how many normal young people going about their day-to-day life have been offered drugs or money or alcohol or clothing or anything in exchange for sex. I've met 2 young people in the last sort of 6 months who have both been offered £200 on Snapchat in exchange for sex.
Wow.
And they're both the same age. They're both 15 and they go to totally different schools. And they were offered identical amounts of money. And it made me think, oh, are you just going, like, is there a person that's just offering these girls this exact amount of money? And like, who are the ones that I don't know? Who are the ones that are not coming to one-to-ones and telling us about this? So it is quite a big thing. We need to get back to our cycle. I know, it's fine. It's fine. There's so many elements to it and they are all really important. So we've got to that point where the young person might feel like they're quite isolated and that they have to do something in exchange for what they've received or what they're going to receive. And actually, the thing that we haven't mentioned is that this sometimes links to criminal exploitation, and they might have to do it just in exchange for like protection.
Yes.
Or the safety of their partner.
Yeah.
So a situation which we have found is young people who are involved in criminal exploitation. The guy potentially is being criminally exploited. And then as a result of that, he is given the opportunity to like write off some of his debt in exchange for sex with his girlfriend and things like that. So that all happens. The definitive thing of what makes it grooming is that when this becomes fractious and the person tries to pull away, and the person tries to say, this isn't right, I'm really uncomfortable, I don't like this situation, is that they will go back to filling the need. And they'll go back to, but I love you, but I care about you.
That love bombing thing again, isn't it?
And the person will feel very controlled in this situation. Like bridges have been broken. Maybe at home feels like a place of just absolute chaos and argument because the person who's grooming has instigated that. Or sometimes the person who's grooming has got the parents on side because they have shown up as this wonderful person who, I don't know, can financially contribute and take good care of their child. And the whole family are kind of wrapped up in it. And I know you've seen experiences where kind of whole families believe the perpetrator.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, isn't it? And it's like, it's very similar. I think this beginning part of the grooming cycle is very similar to when we talk about unhealthy relationships, or because I guess a lot of the people maybe that I work with who have additional needs may be in, they may not being exploited, but they may be in unhealthy relationships. They may be experiencing domestic abuse or domestic violence. And we know, don't we, that people don't always present themselves outwardly to be that violent, horrible, misogynistic, or whatever it may be person. That's the nature of the beast, is that it's quite hard sometimes to spot. And we've been to conferences about violence against women and girls where they've said, like, it doesn't look like who you think it's going to look like. It's not that classic thing of
like the creepy guy
who's got, a big trench coat, who's like
got greasy hair pulled back or something.
It could be anybody.
It could be anybody of any ethnicity, of any socioeconomic background. And that is really important. Like grooming doesn't happen from one specific group of people. And I have met girls who are being groomed by people of so many different ethnicities and backgrounds.
Similar ages to them.
It can be somebody who is a very small amount older than them, or the same age, or someone who is like much, much older. It doesn't tend to really matter.
No.
And I think you just mentioned we went to that Violence Against Women and Girls conference, and one of the most impactful things that I learned there was that there are like certain types of people who are abusive, and some of those people don't think they're doing anything wrong. Some of them people know that they're doing something wrong and they just like it, and they don't care. And some people they just get off on it. Like it's how it is, and there's different profiles. And what I kind of realized is that sometimes these people don't actually realize that they are grooming or controlling somebody either. It's just how they think a relationship works.
Yeah, exactly.
And this cycle tends to go on essentially until the young person holds no more value for the person that is grooming them. And then they're done with them. And that is where a lot of the trauma comes from with young people, because they genuinely did believe that this person was the center of their universe and that they had their best interest at heart, and they didn't perceive themselves to be a victim until their resources are all used up.
Or you've had it, haven't you, where you've met with young people who it started off, and we're going to talk a little bit in a moment about the models of exploitation. But it started off as a boyfriend, and then it's moved on to, now I only see him when he's in a group of other men. And now I don't see him at all. And actually I'm ending up at random men's houses and they're asking me to do things that I'm not comfortable with. But they're so stuck on those cycles. And sometimes it's because they are, this person, like you said, is still giving them money, food, whatever it is. Sometimes the young people become addicted to drugs, and so they are purely doing it for drug purposes and to, feed their addiction.
And then the worst thing about that is that they feel the need by providing the drugs. So they don't even need to care about the person, love bomb them. They don't need to do any of that.
It's just a job. It becomes like, you do this, this is what you get.
And actually, when I talked about the link between sexual exploitation, child sexual exploitation, and adult sex trafficking and exploitation, drugs is really the thing that moves that from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Because when somebody goes from a situation where they then like have a dependent addiction on something really terrible like heroin or crack cocaine, then so then the cycle is like
and I know it sounds like we've sort of gone from 0 to 100 and we're accelerating, because hopefully this doesn't happen to young people. Hopefully there is intervention like yourself or whatever in place,
and there is
to stop.
And it does stop. And I think it's really important to mention that there is evidence to suggest that good intervention at any point in a cycle breaks it. But the fact is that we do see the route into these to sex work or to drug addiction. And it's really difficult because that young person ends up being sort of demonized, criminalized, when actually they are a victim. And we will talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about what young people say to us about exploitation, but often they don't see themselves as a victim. They don't see themselves as needing help. All of the professionals and adults around them, they see that as really annoying and like, I'm just trying to live my life. I just want independence. And they just have a relationship.
Exactly. And then it gets to a point where that connection is lost with family. We've seen young people being moved away from families because the families just can't cope, or the families are in danger because of what the young person's involved with. And
it becomes like a contextual safeguarding issue. So they are not only removed from family and put in like a care placement locally, they might be removed and sent to like the other side of the country to be in care. And then, I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? And then sometimes what happens is they meet other people and then the exploitation continues.
So can you talk to us then? We've sort of discussed the grooming cycle, like how that first starts or how young people can maybe become involved. And it really is as simple as a couple of exchanges on Snapchat, I would say. So it's super important to know what your young people are doing online, who they're talking to. How does the models of exploitation work? Because I think that's also a really great way for parents, carers, anybody in a professional role to maybe start looking at how it happens and what's happening between young people.
So there are a lot of different models of exploitation, but in the context of child sexual exploitation and my experience of working with young people, there are 4 main models which have an impact on young people in our community. There's the boyfriend model of exploitation. And really, I guess, some of what we've just discussed around the grooming cycle kind of plays into the very stereotypical boyfriend model. And this is where somebody will pretend that they are in a relationship with somebody to gain their trust. They're my boyfriend, they're my girlfriend. And it's quite the stereotypical model of exploitation. Oh, I'm your partner, so therefore, if you loved me, you would do this for me. If you cared about me, you would do this for me. Or because I control you, you do this for me. And that person perceives themselves to be in a relationship with someone that cares about them. We could potentially have a conversation about whether it was a healthy or unhealthy relationship. But realistically, we know that exploitation comes from someone in a position of power. And for whatever reason, in the boyfriend model of exploitation, this boyfriend tends to be like somebody who's older or has more power. I was just thinking, as I was saying that I'm talking a lot about girls that are victims of sexual exploitation and men grooming girls. I have done this job for over 3 years doing one-to-ones of exploitation, and I've only ever once had a referral for a boy who people were worried about being groomed or exploited, and he was gay. And he was also being groomed and exploited by men. So I am not a professional that's going to sit there and say there's no possible way that women groom or exploit people. I know that can happen. And we talk about girls exploiting girls, and we're going to come on to peer on peer. But actually, some people might say the partner model of exploitation rather than the boyfriend. But coming from my professional experience, that model has worked best with male on female exploitation, or male on male.
And we're not professionals sort of when it comes to criminal exploitation.
No.
So we don't work with young people who are maybe involved in county lines, which more often than not is young men and boys.
Yeah.
So we sometimes are involved with like missing people's reports and sort of keeping our eye out for young people in the area.
Yeah. And also young people who then have like STIs, because I think somebody coming into the clinic at 16 with syphilis would be very indicative of something going wrong, because that is not an STI, which generally presents in that age group. So just things like that. It's might be the girls that come to us in crisis because of pregnancy or STIs, those kind of things. As well as there's lots of reasons. But I just didn't want it to be taken as I'm saying only men exploit girls. That isn't necessarily the case. We then have the party model of exploitation. Young people might say this was a bit old-fashioned potentially, but then we do still hear about it happening with like big house parties and things like that. So this is where young people will be invited to a party, a rave, an event, something. They generally happen in London, and kids from other areas come. At these parties, it's fine that you're young, everybody's drinking, everybody's doing drugs. There might be public sex, like people who are just having sex in the corner of a room, because then that kind of normalizes that behavior, and it's quite planned. Young people are then provided with like really quite a lot of drugs and alcohol, and they are in compromising situations. So they find themselves in compromising situations. The purpose of the party model is either just to invite groups of men to a party that you've put on where young girls are there just to exploit them, or it's to kind of like find victims for your boyfriend model, or it can be to take compromising pictures of young people, get them very drunk, encourage them to take their clothes off, get two girls to kiss each other for your own benefit, and the phones are out and people are filming and people are taking pictures. Sometimes images and pictures created at party models can then be used to continue to exploit the young person. So like, if you don't do what I say, I'll show somebody this image of you or this video of you, that kind of thing.
I was just thinking, actually, when we work with young people, I think they're probably more able to recognize when they're out of the situation, because we also know that young people can say all of the right things to our faces and they know what's okay and not okay.
Opposite.
Exactly. And maybe some of that is about being a young person, but obviously not things that put them at risk and in danger. But when we talk about maybe the party model with them, they're like, obviously that's really weird. That obviously that's not okay. Obviously I'd leave, or I'd say, no, don't take a picture of me, or I'd go home and report it. But when it comes to like the actual situation and things like the boyfriend model, I think they find it so much more difficult to distinguish maybe what is okay and what's not okay, particularly around things like being online and picture taking, which we have already spoken about, and you're going to talk about sextortion, because as we've said, young people are just like to us, but that's just normal. Like,
just is what it is.
That just is what it is. And there's no like, they're just completely desensitized to it. And maybe they don't see it as that deep. It's not that much of a threat. It's just, it is what it is. If my nudes go up, my nudes go up. Like, there's nothing I can do about it sort of attitude.
And I think the thing with the party model is that they don't know all the people that are there. They don't know that people came to this event purely for the purpose of having sex with underage people. It could just be, I had a fun night out. Someone gave me a load of free alcohol and drugs, and I got laid.
And now I want to go again.
Now I want to go again because I had the best night ever. And that's a hard part of it. The other kind of main thing we see, and actually the main way we see girls exploiting other girls, is potentially through the peer-on-peer model. And I know a lot of people will be familiar with the like Rochdale story and the three girls. Was it called Three Girls?
Three Girls,
the TV program that came with that. And actually that really, really well portrays the peer-on-peer exploitation. So how that works is kind of that one young person will be a victim of exploitation already, and already kind of in that grooming cycle. And they will be used to exploit other girls, essentially, to I don't know how to describe it, like to bring more along and to encourage them that it's safe and that they can be trusted, essentially to create more victims of exploitation.
Yeah.
And sometimes these girls don't really know that that's what they're doing, or they really need to keep themselves safe.
Yeah. And so they don't have a choice.
So they don't have a choice, or they need to continue having their needs met. And it actually, sometimes it's easier for parents to intervene in these sorts of situations because it's quite easy to identify if your kid is being pressured by a friend to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And that's actually maybe is this person a good friend to you? How are they helping you?
And easier for young people to distinguish, like, if for themselves, if their friend suddenly behavior changes towards them and they start, you know, saying, oh, you've got to come with me to meet this guy. You've got to get in this guy's car with me, all those sorts of things. Potentially they're less, I don't know, like I'm thinking about how young people would react if their friends started to do that too, rather than it happening to them solely. Yeah. If friends were sort of bringing them along, they may be a bit more like, this feels weird, or this feels a bit, different.
And I think the really hard thing with that model of exploitation is this is where you generally find that somebody who is a victim of something will be criminalized for their activity.
Yeah.
And they could be criminalized for what they are doing to other young people, or they might be being involved in crime, shoplifting, drug dealing, all of those other sort of things, because the peer-on-peer model relies on one victim being really deeply embedded in that. And actually, if we're being really honest, sometimes it's like in gangs and being really deeply embedded, like in a gang. And I think when we say gang, people think that if a young person is in a gang, they would know and wear a hoodie that's like, I'm this gang or something.
Yeah.
But they don't.
No.
They don't know that they're necessarily being used as part of something bigger. So they're the kind of main face-to-face models. It's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think just because, like, this is a really sensitive topic, but I think because we have the roles we have and we see so much of it, and like I think we said last week, so much of our roles at Luton Sexual Health intertwine, and so much of our colleague Donna's roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's something that we are super aware of all the time, to the point where, you know, Kelsie and I will be in the street or in the car or whatever, be like, look, that's happening there, and how can we go and help that young person? Or, you know, so I think it's super important that everybody is aware. But like you said, those are face-to-face models, and maybe easier for professionals at school or parents to spot. What are some of the things that happen online? Because we've talked about how grooming, the initial stages sort of happen online, but we also know that things continue, and potentially that is much easier for young people to hide what's going on online than it is if they're out and about and being manoeuvred across the country.
Getting picked up in cars and going out and about. So yes, we said about a lot of this starts online, but that is really just talking about like initial conversations, back and forths, like I want to meet you this weekend. So from Monday to Friday, I'm messaging you nonstop. Some young people don't want to go out, don't want to go to parties, don't fit in, don't feel great in a crowd, but do feel quite safe online. And those are the young people that are potentially more vulnerable to online exploitation, rather than the ones that are like confidently going out to parties potentially. So online exploitation can happen in lots of different ways, but one of the things that we have heard about a lot recently is sextortion. And sextortion is where a young person is encouraged to share images of themselves and then extorted for those images. So someone will say along the lines of, if you don't give me more, then I will release them. I'll send them to your parents. I'll put them around school. Or they might say, if you don't send me money, something like that. And actually it's really tragic because people feel very alone in that situation, and they've perceived themselves to have done something wrong. Because they did something that they were groomed into doing. They don't know they've been groomed. And with sextortion, much more time will go into building the relationship online. So that filling a need still happens. And that need could be for companionship, really. Often friendship, respect, someone that cares about your ideas. Sometimes they might, I don't know, like in-game currencies and things like that. Like, gifting people things. Like my son said the other day something like, oh, my friend's going to give me a £10 bundle on this game. And I was like, why? Say no. Like, you don't, but it's tempting, isn't it? Like, and actually it was just his friend wanted him to have the same gear so that they could both play at the same level. I was just like, whatever. Like, do you know what I mean? But actually, as parents, we need to look at that. Like, who are our children playing games with online? Do they know them in real life? Do they not? It doesn't necessarily just happen to online. It does happen. It doesn't necessarily just happen to girls or boys specifically. Sextortion is very much happening across the board. And it's also happening to like young LGBT people. So there might be young people who have shared information about their gender or sexuality with someone online, potentially shared images, someone who had questions about their gender, who maybe chose to dress or present in a way that was a secret. They might have shared that image with someone else online that they trusted, and then that is being used to extort and exploit them. So there are some very tragic circumstances where young people have felt so alone and so targeted and so vilified by sextortion that they have taken their own life because they just don't know what to do. And I think that's really hard, because then parents are left feeling like, but I never even knew this was happening. How could I have helped? And I think that all we can do is try and get our kids to feel like we're a safe space, and that we're a non-judgmental space so that they can come to us. Because it's very easy to say, oh, I don't know, like the way you talk about other people, that celebrity, that woman, that person, whatever, use derogatory language, maybe say someone's behavior is promiscuous, or that their sexual or gender identity is incorrect and that you're unhappy with it. And all of those things make our young people not necessarily feel like we're a safe person to come to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very hard when parents are like, why won't my kid tell me they're being exploited? Well, because they don't feel like they can tell you anything. You have to create that environment, and it's really hard because it isn't really a crisis intervention.
No,
it has to come before there's a crisis.
And would you say as well, like, do you think it would be fair to say that if maybe some of these conversations that we've been encouraging parents to have throughout the journey of this podcast around sex and relationships, if then they are forming a romantic relationship online, if there are exchanging of sexual images, if they are meeting up with that person and having sex with them, they're much less likely to talk about when something starts going wrong or when something feels a bit off, if they're not openly having or have openly had any of those conversations at all. That feels too far removed for the young person. That feels like
the jump is enormous.
It's too much. Yeah, exactly. Rather than not saying, because there's a really fine line, isn't there? We're going to talk about this a lot next week in the wake of adolescence. But we saw an article about how young people don't have a right to privacy, and that we should be, or parents and carers should be sort of monitoring exactly what people are doing, and they don't have a right to privacy. But I feel like we both are on the same page that that's not the case. It is exactly like you're saying. They are still entitled to their privacy, but they need to know what the boundaries are, what's safe and what's not safe, what the risks are.
And what your expectations are.
And what your expectations are, and have those discussions so that, like you said, you're creating a space that young people can come back to.
And the situations that I find the hardest to deal with when it comes to sexual exploitation is when the young person, for lots of different reasons, religious reasons, cultural reasons, all sorts of things, their parents don't think that they should be in any sort of sexual relationship. So we can't deal with the issues of the relationship that they're in because no one should know that they're in one at all. And as much as their parents don't want them to be in a relationship to keep them safe, they're now unsafe, and then they don't want to say any part of it.
And that rings true from what we see from a clinical perspective. We see young girls maybe between the ages of 15 and 16 who may be being exploited or are sort of on our radar as a risk, and they won't even come and get contraception because they're worried that they don't want their parents to find out that they're on contraception. They won't even get, the implant or the pill in case somebody finds out. And it's like addressing all of those issues so that this young person can just get some support is like paramount, and maybe goes maybe a bit unnoticed. Because also, like, we do see young people that do have parents at home. They are in a house that is supposedly, I don't know how you'd say it, atypical.
Yeah, how do you say the predictable?
The predictable
family home.
Yeah, and so it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
Absolutely.
Or your young person's not a target just because they
come from a stable environment, or you don't perceive them to have any needs that haven't been met.
Yeah.
So just because you as a parent think, well, I've done everything I ever could to meet all of my child's needs, they don't necessarily perceive it like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we all learn as parents. Like, you think you're doing an amazing job, and then your kid says something and you're like, oh, okay, you don't get that.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay.
What are some of the other things then you think that
positive parents can do?
The things that parents can do. Like, what can we do about the situation? Because it is horrible. It's a really hard topic to talk about. It's difficult for us to talk to young people about it who we barely know, let alone for parents and carers. So what are some of your tips, your advice for having these conversations, or for a wider picture, how we can support young people? I
think that when introducing the topic of grooming and exploitation and really unhealthy relationships, I often come at it from a place of, look, this might never happen to you, but this might happen to one of your friends. Yeah. And if you can identify that this is happening to your friend, then you are able to support them, and that you can come and talk to me about it, even if it's not yourself that you're worried about. It's quite useful sometimes to use the media and use scenes in films do you think that guy really loves that girl? Or do you think that he's just doing that because he wants something from her? Or do you think that that girl really wants that other girl to go with her and do this? Or she just feels scared? I don't know.
Yeah. Developing some of those critical thinking where you can watch something together. That's actually a really great idea, isn't it? If you're I don't know how to have this conversation, but actually watching a film or a TV program.
Yeah. Oh, I kind of was only talking about the media part of it and identifying things when we were on our way here this morning. And actually what I'll try and do is think of some examples with some YouTube videos. Yeah. And we love directing people to go to our Padlet that does exist now.
It does.
We've actually made it. Yeah. So we love directing people to our Padlet, and maybe I will have a look what I can find and put some resources around healthy relationships on there. One of the activities that I do with young people that really works, that you can do with your friends, with your family, which I've sent to one of my best friends who is 39 and been do this, is to consider what you want, need and deserve from a relationship. If a young person is able to identify how they think they deserve to be treated or what they really want. So they could say, I want someone who's 6 foot with brown hair and green eyes. Right, that might well be what you want, but what do you need?
Yeah.
Do you need someone to listen to you? Do you need someone to make you feel like you're important? Do you deserve to be treated with respect? And then I think that if we're able to establish what we actually want and need out of a situation, then we can consider whether the situation is meeting our wants and needs.
Yeah.
But if we have no idea what they are in the first place, that's quite difficult.
Yeah, brilliant, amazing. And I guess we always end every episode sort of talking about what questions young people ask us around the topic we've spoken about, or if we've had a particularly hard or interesting question from a young person. But we were having a conversation before recording about how we don't really get young people asking us questions directly related to any of the topics of grooming or exploitation. No. And we talked about how that's often probably because they don't view themselves as a victim in the situation, or they don't think that's happening to them, or they don't think it's ever going to happen to them. And that might be because it's already happening to them and the boyfriend is just love bombing them and buying them, all of the new trainers or whatever that might be. Or they're so deeply in it that they're scared to ask for support, don't know how, and are completely isolated. So,
and there potentially is a lot of shame attached to that as well.
Yeah.
So when a young person potentially does realise, I made a mistake. I won't say a swear word then for the first time on the podcast and stop myself. When a young person realises that they might be in crisis, they can feel quite a lot of shame and guilt, and that's quite a burden on them then accessing support, because they might feel like, oh, I did this.
Yeah. So I guess our key message is young people probably aren't going to ask that question. So
no,
you guys need to ask them.
Yeah, you guys need to ask the questions.
You guys ask the questions, yeah.
Ask the questions, have the conversations, talk about healthy relationships, talk about giving and receiving gifts and where it comes from. And don't be scared. Don't be scared to have that conversation with a young person and say, potentially this isn't for you. This is for anyone that might need it. And sometimes that can help kind of break down that first little barrier. That was a lot.
That was a lot. Thank you, Kelsie, for talking us through all of that.
Yeah.
We're going to put as many resources and things in our Padlet to give you an extra boost, because again, it's a really big topic. It's a sensitive one as well, and we've only got a short amount of time to discuss it. So we hope you got all of the important bits from that. We have got our last episode coming up. That's our last one we've got for you in our series of RSE for grown-ups. Join us next time, where we're going to be talking about raising boys and young men in the wake of adolescence. So it will be a good one. And we've also got a special guest joining us. So make sure you tune in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.